everybody. We welcome you at this conversation with Michèle Small, the former director of the North American office at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And on behalf of the association and our network of companies and sympathizers and partners, we extend with this event our gratitude to Michèle for her long-standing involvement in the bilateral relations between Canada and Eurasian countries. Let me introduce to you our also moderator, Gilles Breton. He's a national chairman. He will be helping us. And Michèle, as you saw in the program, we have extensive questions and topics and subjects to cover. You all saw them online. So we'll speak about the history of collaboration between European banks, some interesting facts and achievements. There will be a series of personal questions to Michèle. We are always curious to know what it takes to take this position and what it takes to accomplish those tasks in operating at the international level. We are very interested to know more of that. We'll be speaking about the differences between Canadian businesses operate and maybe Eurasian. And also we would be interested to know how American companies are different from the way they involve in international business. We would like to know, Canadian companies would like to know maybe some advice on how to get involved more with the programs of European Bank, and maybe some advice on how we could partner collaboration among financial institutions to support Canadian companies. And Michèle, I would give you words to present yourself and all your achievements. I know you sent them to me, but I felt like you should say those words yourself. No. You'll see the feelings. And
well, I think that's a bit difficult. What I would say is that I'm really pleased to be here. CERBA has been a friend of EBRD for many years, even before I took the position in the office in DC. A little of me, I joined the bank in 1994. Before that, I was working for Bank of America, well, Bank of Boston, which is now part of Bank America Group, in credit. So I've been with EBRD and with development for quite a large portion of my life. It's a very, very rewarding place to be, not just EBRD, but that path, the developer's path. Most of the time that I was at EBRD, I was in the real estate sector. So I ran the real estate, property and tourism sector at EBRD. I left in 2012 and ran my own consultancy program. I looked a lot more at other countries that EBRD did not cover, which was interesting for me. So I went and did some work in East Africa. And then the opportunity to come back arose and I took it. Anyway, now I'm gone again. So that's me in 5 words or less or more.
It's just the beginning, yes. Okay, Gilles, would you like to start with your first question?
No, I just wanted to say a few words that I think the interest here is that, we have what we called I used to work with government in embassies and whatnot. And I think what we have is a practitioner, someone who knows the field, so to speak. So I think that's very important. I think so that's why we wanted to have this event. So I think it's relevant to the way we develop business, so to speak. And I think what we know is that the EBRD also was what you would have financial and commercial intelligence that few other entities would have. So perhaps the one thing, if you want to start with a question, we talk about especially banking and one of the things that we're interested in, because of course in Canada, in CERBA, we have a few large enterprises, but we also have medium and small businesses. So I think we'd like to hear what your experience or your views are with respect to the financing of new small and medium enterprises in the Eurasian region, and what you see there as the prospects or the challenges, if you want.
Well, I think the first thing I'd say is that for EBRD, and I will always say as well, the other MDBs, the SME sector is very important because we feel that is actually the underbelly of what we call transition. If you don't have growth in the small and medium-sized companies, if you don't have growth that even comes from below that, from the entrepreneurs, you can't actually grow a country. And a country, it actually helps a country become democratic, more democratic. So large companies come into a developing country at the beginning. So you often, you see a sort of a trend. The very large sponsors come in, they lead large projects. Those large projects should lead to smaller subcontractors then becoming much more independent and taking on the roles that the foreign FDI would have done. And then from that, a person working in a company says, well, I want to start my own business. And it's so it's organic. But it's very important that that sector is supported. What EBRD and most other financial IFIs do is that, we are large, bumbling organizations. So it's very hard to do tiny, small loans that support those smaller companies. So most of us have, or most of the banks, I have to stop saying us, as I'm no longer an us. Most of the banks have have programs that reach those smaller companies. And these are normally done with the help of, as you bring up financial institutions, local financial institutions. So it's a way to actually help the financial institutions learn how to assess risk in the small companies. And also with EBRD's help, we can reach those smaller companies. So we would do things like afford a credit line to a local bank. That local bank will then be tasked to on-lend in certain sectors. So we may have a women in business program, which the local bank knows that what the criteria for their on-lending are small women entrepreneurs. We may have farmers, we may have tech industry. So that's how you see the organic growth of the small and medium-sized companies. But because EBRD and most of the other IFIs are too big to act in sort of the retail space of banking, they need the participation of the local banks. But that also makes us ensure that the local banks are stronger, because we don't work with a bank unless that bank has gone through due diligence. And then we will help them do things like understand how to analyze risk.
Yes, just as a small comment, by the way, what you describe about the problems with small and medium-sized enterprises is something that we're not unfamiliar with in Canada. I mean, there's still issues with that. That's the traditional problem that we've had in Canada in terms of the financing of small and medium-sized enterprises. And as we speak, of course, in certain provinces, for instance, there are specific programs to try to fund on a regional basis, small and medium-sized enterprises. So it's a feature of transition. But not only, I would say, just a comment, because I think
you're quite right. There's transition in almost every economy. So you can have a developed country, but then you can have regions like here in the UK. There's a north of England that is crying out for funding. So it's not just a developing country issue. It is also maybe a regional development. Most countries have large capitals, and you have regions that are left behind, this whole argument of the left behind, and they need to be reached in the same way. It's the same philosophy.
Yes.
Sometimes I think of it like this, though. You see, in a developing country, you get to understand the mistakes that are made in a developed country, and maybe sometimes jump over those hurdles and reach the problem before it becomes too much of a problem.
Good. I will be mingling with questions, Gilles and me. I'm very much driven on personal development. And this is what you see when working with companies. I try to always tell them that unless you become that open, globally minded person and open, and you develop yourself as a personality, this is the chance for your company to build international business. Because international business, it's still human business, and maybe much more than local businesses selling on a local market. And it's here that you need to take this development approach, not just sell, but develop something. And it's not easy for us, you see, to convince them. And personally, the word development, you see, myself, just these words, you see, when you get into the sense of the word, how it changed, well, myself, I will just name a little bit. When I was writing some theses, I couldn't understand that, well, there are people who try to change the situations. Then also working as a consultant at European Bank with Kazakhstani companies, when managers don't believe to what you are saying and very much driven on outcome. Then moving to Canada, how much I needed to rebuild myself. And now developing a community, again, another just beyond expectations, reshaping yourself. And Michèle, the question is now this: how you changed yourself, you see, during working at EBRD and also before that, how you were preparing yourself to this position, and what did you learn, and how it feels like inside, you see, when you represent such an entity, what do you feel inside? How it changed yourself? Please elaborate on that.
Okay, well, I think two things. One, I grew up in a third world country. So I'm UK born, but my mother is Guyanese. So I grew up in Guyana. So I grew up around developing, and it was a very underdeveloped country at the time. But before the EBRD, I had no sense of development in terms of development finance and in anything. I mean, I was a serious credit officer. I started in trade finance, and then I was a credit officer. We were working with, you know, UK companies, US companies. And then in 1994, I got a call that this new bank was starting. And I went in there mainly as sort of compliance, doing compliance. Still, again, not at all interested in it, as you would say, it in the development part of it. But when I started to work for a sector team, and I understood very, very quickly, you understand that what you're doing is not just because, you know, I had seen infrastructure deals before in Bank of Boston, I had seen real estate deals before, but these deals concentrated solely on the bottom line, the return. And, you know, after a while, that can get quite, you know, there are people who are built for that, and I'm not one of them. So I was quite happy to learn that I was doing something, even if that something at the beginning of my career was doing the due diligence on financing of an office building. I knew that that office building, the financing of that office building led to the increased FDI, because then it would give you space for people like KPMG and people like that to get into the country. That then gave consulting up. So there's always what we call a transfer of know-how and backward linkages. And when you start to understand that what you do actually matters, you can't ever stop doing it. So I don't think I'll ever be able to just have a job where I am just, I don't know, working for a large hedge fund or a large real estate company, and all we do is build lovely, shiny buildings. So I think once you're bitten, that's the way I would put it, you can't, I think it's, once you understand that what you have has an impact. So the new word is impact investing. EBRD has been impact investing since we were formed, because that's what we do. What we do has to have an impact on the country and on the people. So it's for me, it is now just a natural thing to do, but I can't say that I woke up or I was born and I thought development. No, I don't think I understood what it was until I was working in a sector team in EBRD. And I think the other thing is that I saw the transition, not just of the countries we were in, but the bank itself, where we did start off with projects and a sprinkling of, you know, transition. So there was always an underlying transition, but I would say in the last sort of 10 years, and I think a lot of this is down to our old president, our last president, Sir Suma Chakrabarti, we expanded what we did in terms of development to show the actual impact that this brought to people and to look at different types of impact. And I think that's what, that's sort of one of the things that sort of please me about the job I do and will continue to do.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, so the words that really impressed me, again, I would say that once you got on board with the meaning why you are doing that, You just can't stop doing it. It becomes you. Great.
Well, there are people who can, because, you know, there are some people who just think of their own bottom line, you know, and you know, can I go off and make millions? I think for me, if I had a choice of millions and a couple of thousand and one had the impact, I'd probably, you know, go with the smaller sum of money. But that's just me.
Well, and we are learning from you. It's not just you, we are learning from you. Yes, Gilles.
No, I think perhaps we should try to have some other people participate in this. I mean, even from Western Canada, I wonder. I know that, you know, because we already touched a little bit on the aspect of regional development, which I think is very important, that dimension of regional development is important. So perhaps we could address that. Do I have a question coming from Western Canada? Yes.
Looking at the pictures, Jill, I don't see too many Western Canadians on the
Yes,
call.
well, there you go.
Judy
yes.
was on, but I think she had to go off. But
there is Judy.
Yeah, she's
There is
gone.
Judy from your chapter.
She's gone. Yeah.
She's gone. Yeah. Well, no, I mean, from the Western Canada perspective, and for Canadians certainly know that. I mean, Saskatchewan, and Alberta basically have always been energy based, and that has been the lifeblood of the provinces and of the revenue. And of course, that's had huge hits in the last several years, and it continues to be that. And I've noticed with interest, even the big companies, the oil and gas companies, are all changing their focus. And in looking at new ways, renewable energies, they're starting to talk about hydrogen and various sorts. So I mean, that's part of the regional development, is to diversify. But these two provinces have had to be considering very seriously. And I think there's lots of monies needed for the startups. I mean, one of the things in Alberta that seems to be getting important is the whole nanotechnology industry, where we're demonstrating expertise in small clusters in that part, artificial intelligence and so on, competing with Montreal, I think, down the road. But we'll have to work on that. But diversification is key in many parts.
I think that we have had, well, just before I left, we had a couple webinars with the government of Alberta, exactly along the lines of the hydrogen, the carbon capture, because there are technologies there that could be brought to our region. And that doesn't only help the Eurasia region, but it helps the Canadian companies who are then able to expand out and, as you say, diversify. So I think that's another way to look at how the two help each other. Small companies getting contracts, or even just pitching, because once you pitch to EBRD, you can then understand how you can maybe partner with someone else and go and do that, and that grow your company here too. So it's a win-win.
Okay, maybe I will continue knowing.
Yes.
No, I think there might be.
Marina, it's Margaret. I had a question.
Yes, Margaret, please.
I mean, as you know, I'm based in Ottawa, but I'm a Winnipegger. So at heart is Western Canada for me. And having served the 4 years in Moscow and then in Central Asia, I want to reiterate what Frank was saying in terms of energy, which was our base for beginning the trade with these countries. But also it was also agriculture. Food came much later, and those keywords that were just mentioned, diversification, development of new partners, domestic and international, as well as the development of the middle class. I think those three factors post-91 were critical in terms of letting in new players, ensuring a broader economic base, and ensuring not only bilateral, but also multilateral partnerships. And so I'm extremely pleased to hear some of these comments, and that would be what I consider to be underlining some of the progress and successes. Thanks.
I agree completely. And this is when you look at the oil-rich countries, Kazakhstan, even Azerbaijan, you know, for some of them, Kazakhstan, I think, realized quickly that it had to diversify. and started a program. Some of it may have stalled now, but they realized very quickly that they had to diversify, and they started a program of the privatization. Azerbaijan came to the table a little later, and it was not until the oil prices fell that they realized that they had to do the same thing. But for I think no country should be solely dependent on one thing. And that also goes for diversification in terms of regional diversification. So no country should be dependent on a couple large cities, and also diversification in terms of people and different types of people. So always bringing in indigenous, bringing in women, bringing in, young people, bringing back old people. I think all of that is quite important in the
I like the bringing
diversification.
back old people.
Well, I like that too, by the way, Margaret. That's why I'm plugging it.
Margaret,
Yeah,
this
thank
is
you.
what we are doing at CERBA also.
I would like to add one more thing, I guess, and we talk about Kazakhstan and so on, and these are countries that have been working hard in the last 20 years in developing their industries and developing their technologies and so on. But one of the ones I'm excited about is Uzbekistan, which has been opening up more and more the last several years with a change in political structure and an openness to investment and to Western technologies. And at some point, maybe, Michelle, it'd be nice if you comment EBRD's relationship to Uzbekistan or what potentials you see there, but that may be later in the agenda. But I think this is a country where Kazakhstan was 20 years ago.
I think it's a good moment. Yes, Michelle, we would love to.
Yeah, I think that I'm also excited. I'm very excited by Uzbekistan. We were out of it for a long time, as so was most of the world. But when Uzbekistan came back, it came back with a bang. And they have actually taken on quite a fierce and challenging reform agenda. Let's see how it goes, because in my gray-haired experience, you start the reform agenda starts like this, then it does that, then it hits a hurdle and it does that. So it's a matter of keeping them on that trajectory. But so far, so good. I was actually up at 7 a.m. this morning, UK time, on a call with Tashkent.
Wow.
So I'm hoping that I can get involved in a few things there.
Okay. Michelle, maybe there are some projects that the bank.
Just let me say that I can't actually read the questions. So if there are any questions, I see Antoine is typing little things. I can't read them. So if you have a question, shout it out.
Yeah, it's mostly you see on like to interaction between participants, but the most important we ask you. Well, I was receiving questions from companies to know more what the bank is currently doing, if you're allowed to speak, or maybe some guidance, what industries, maybe from the recent, because you just recently.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna say, and then if anything has changed in the month since I've left, then Mr. Todd or Miss Edwards can jump in, who are both ex-colleagues who are still in the office in DC. The bank, I think it's focused very much now on climate. So they are now looking at how they can align with the Paris Agreement. There is a lot of emphasis still on green energy, green infrastructure. Also currently mobilization. So I think we might speak about this a little bit more later with the banks and things, but the new mobilization strategy is being written to see how we can help further crowd private sector financing into our region. There's always been a heavy gender agenda at the bank. Digital. So there are three main things: green, digital, and gender. Those are the sort of overarching themes, but then below each of them, everything else is woven in. So nothing is forgotten. For instance, there may be some countries that you can't do anything digitalization yet. But, so we continue on our strategy, which is to help the countries towards reform. And the way we do that, the way EBRD does that is not so much so as the World Bank does it with working at the government level. We work And I think it's the same with IFC, work towards strengthening the private sector so that the private sector has a greater say in how things are run. And you know what, a heavy investment in a sector in a country has a lot of clout, and it probably has more clout than someone at the government talking to someone about something, because no government wants a large amount of money to suddenly leave because they have done something. We have seen in the past, in recent past, things like the green legislation, the pullback of the green legislation in Ukraine, how that caused companies to be very upset. So it happened a long time ago in Bulgaria, where they had tariffs and subsidies, and then they'd grab them away and the thing collapsed. So I think it's important that you do have good policies from the government, but there should be an upward push from business as well. Ben, is there anything else that the bank is doing?
Thanks, Michelle. Greetings, everyone. Michelle, I couldn't have said it better. So that's pretty much it. Nothing has changed within the month that you've left. So thank you.
Okay. Michelle, maybe now some practical steps. Let's speak first on behalf of companies. So if they're eager to collaborate with European Bank in Eurasia, Canadian companies, what would be their steps? Is it easy? Is it at all possible? So how would you suggest?
It's extremely possible. And the reason that we have an office that is in DC was mainly because we looked at the history of the bank. And in the very beginning, we had a lot of, we had participation from Canadian companies, and we had a lot of participation from American companies. Then that tailed off. Now, in my personal view, there are two reasons for this. The first is the geographical distance away. And the second is that I don't think many people understood or understand how multilateral development banks can help them. Many companies think that working with a multilateral development bank, be it EBRD, be it Asian Development Bank, who are strong in some of these countries, be it IFC, is something burdensome. And they don't see the benefits. So you might have a longer sort of due diligence process, but that only helps you. It helps you with your understanding of the country. It helps you with the understanding of the sector in which you're entering into. And then it gives you this partner that we call the partner of choice, the partner that then sits next to you throughout all the ups, the downs, and is there to solve your problems. And so I think a lot of, because of the distance, so there are many European companies who are in our region, and there are many more than there are North American, and I think that's geographical. So they know the countries, they were on their borders, you know, they know them longer. A lot of them were in Russia, so they know Central Asia because they were in Russia. That's the main one. But I think that also there's if you're so far away, how do you actually assess the risk of something? How do you know what opportunities are there? So a lot of that is up to us to tell. And that's what people like Ben will have to do going forward. This is what I tried to do for the time that I was there, is to go out to cities, you know, don't just go to one large city, but, you know, go to the smaller cities, go to provinces, go in America, go visit every state, but not every state, but every little city where you see a cluster of companies that may have like agriculture or energy that may have the skills that we need in the region, and say what we are and say how we can help. Because there's nothing stopping a company going to the region apart from lack of knowledge of the region. It's about information. And that's the other part of diversification that I forgot to mention, was that we look at countries and we want to see diversification of FDI. It's like being dependent on oil. You don't want to be dependent on one source of FDI, because that is also very dangerous. So it's very important you get a good broad spectrum of FDI in your country.
Okay, Michelle, I have, well, maybe just to clarify, you see, is it already too late for a company to get involved in the projects once they are announced by the bank? Or you see how you should say, or we should build the partnerships first and then they go to the bank.
Right, no. I think I was actually, that whole speech I just made was all focused on investment. So that's a company who is a sponsor who is going to invest in the country. For a company that is a contractor or a consultant, it is a little easier, but also needing a little bit of, let's call it gut, because you still face the geographical distancing. So for a consultant or a company, it is almost too late by the time the project is announced. So there are some tricks that you can do. You can work at looking at our pipeline. So looking and you know, what I can do is send you a presentation that we made to the government of Alberta about this very same thing, and you can then distribute it to people. Or what Mr. Todd can do, and I will help, is that we get our procurement people to come and speak directly to CERBA, because there are tricks. So you look to see what's coming through in our pipeline. If you see what's coming through our pipeline, then you'll see what types, is that a project where you have a skill? And if it is, then raise your hand, contact the office in DC. They will help you to reach the right person and you do a pitch. Now, the procurement department are not going to speak to you once the tenderness started, because then that puts a bias. But they're very happy to hold meetings, webinars, in-person meetings with companies who want to understand opportunities. And then also reach out to the sector teams. So get to know the people in the sector teams that know this. But don't just look at EBRD, look at Asian Development Bank as well. I have seen Asian Development Bank has many more also public sector projects, so there are more opportunities than EBRD, we're much more private sector type bank. But it is about trying to determine what we're about to do, and then put your hand up, and that's why the webinars we arranged with Alberta and the clean tech and our energy efficiency and our CCUS teams was mainly so that they could talk about their technologies. When they talked about their technologies with our techs, because I'm not a tech at this, but there are people who are, you know, very smart on these things. And when people like that start to speak together, and then they say, oh, but can you do this and can you do that? Then there's a relationship. And then they remember, oh, I've got this project. Let me call whoever, you know, the person is in Alberta and speak to them about it. So that's important as well. So if I were CERBA and you had industries or technologies that you wanted to showcase, then I would raise it with Ben, and I would suggest having a webinar where the tech people, so the people who are speaking the same language as the consultants who are the technical people, are there. And if it's a consultancy type thing, then again, we can introduce you to the people who run whatever the businesses that you're interested in.
Yes, at least once a year we should do those events.
Yeah,
and thank you for guiding us.
There.
Yes. Now
I was going to say there's also a program that's run by the Canadian Embassy along with the World Bank once or twice a year in DC, where Canadian companies come and present. And they get to present to all of the MDBs who are actually based there, and the procurement people come over as well. So you should try to see how you can somehow get yourselves into that meeting.
Yes.
I think I can send you the name of the, it's the Canadian ED's alternate director at the World Bank who does a lot of this stuff.
It's
Okay.
Margaret. Can I just add something here? I remember EBRD was most helpful given their practical knowledge working with the companies that did succeed in bids on projects in terms of exactly what Michèle mentioned earlier was the public and government policies. They were the ones who were able to tell our companies that after 91, in some cases for a small enterprise and even large ones, sometimes there were 42 government steps required in order to get a permit, a license, a go-ahead, a loan, funding. And that was what was so important, that over the 27 years, slowly those many government bureaucratic steps where it costs money, it costs time, and it folded many small companies and offshore investors. But I think that that earlier mention of what public policy is doing, and the continuation of reform, keeping the momentum up. And I think Elena Son, who's online, understands that really well, working with the Uzbekistan chapter. But I just wanted to reinforce the public policy is critical to success, and EBRD was most helpful to our companies.
And I'll say that it's a lot of the EBRD work and reform is driven by private sector. If you can go to someone and say, this is so broken, and if you fixed it, you get billions more investment, they'll do it. I mean, that's a bigger stick than, I'm not going to give you an IMF. Well, it's not really a bigger stick. It's a smaller stick. It's a small carrot with a little sugar on top.
Okay, Michèle, now a bit hidden information. I know that it takes of the country also to promote Canadian businesses, let's say, and a Canadian bank should participate in Eurasian, in your bank, in EBRD. Does it happen? Does it take place now that Canadian banks do participate with you, or we have to build that?
Yeah, well, after a little bit of research that I did with my good friend Christian Klebert, who is the director of our syndication and mobilization team, no Canadian banks have been part of our syndication program since before 2016. We talked a little bit about this before, and I think for a big bank to get involved in a country, there are two ways to do it. You come under our AB structure, which allows you to share in our preferred creditor status, or you somehow start joining the trade facilitation program. For a bank to lend locally to a Canadian company, then it has to have a partner. So what we saw with the Austrian, the Italian, the German, Spanish, etc. banks is that they all went off and bought subsidiaries. So they bought a bank in the country. That then allowed them to learn that country. They had then had a retail force in that country. It's very highly unlikely that you'll get a large bank jumping into a country by itself without some sort of local presence. They did do it. I remember very much so. It wasn't so much Canadian, but you had like HSBC and all of these banks in Ukraine. Where are they now? They are not there, because it's very hard to be a banking presence without some sort of partnership. An example of how that partnership could work is how Citi works with DFC. So Citibank works with DFC by sort of being DFC's, so DFC gives them a line of credit and then they go on lend it. So that's sort of like a government to US government to a US bank way of doing it. There may be a Canadian way of doing it like that, but I think the first step would be if you got involved in the syndication, became an B lender under our loans, which yes, the bank still has to do its own due diligence, but it's assured that it benefits from our preferred creditor status. It does not, in some circumstances, have to record the full geographical risk on their balance sheet, so that de-risks it a bit. But they have to want to take real risk in that country. Christian also said that I should mention that during this new strategy that they are writing, what they're looking for, Canadian pension funds and Canadian insurance companies who can participate in our unfunded risk participation funds. That's where there is an EBRD loan. The insurance company or pension fund takes an unfunded part of it, so they don't have to commit to fund yet. And then if something goes wrong, they step in. but the benefit of that is they get to share the margin. So if EBRD has a 5% margin, they share that. So that for almost nothing, well, unless something went wrong, they get a fee. Things go wrong a lot. So yeah, but again, if you circle back to the banks and they are interested in that, give us some time. They're very busy doing their new mobilization strategy, so they won't have time now, but they are willing to have someone come and speak to the banks.
Yes, I think as an association, we could set up such a close conversation sometime, maybe, if not this year, maybe early next year.
Early next year.
And start
it might be possible later this year, but let me see. Also, when the new mobilization strategy is finished, it will be published. So it may be a good opportunity that they present it, because that is bigger than just banks as well. That is, how do you get private finance into our region to allow the region to flourish?
Yes, very good. I will allow Gilles maybe to get involved.
Yes, a quick question. No. I was reminded of the fact that many years ago, before the pandemic, when we had the EBRD visit every year to Canada, at times even the president of the bank would come, we would meet at EDC, Export Development Corporation. So there was this synergy or partnership that existed between EBRD and EDC. So of course, I think that has kind of diminished in the last few years because EDC has not been present in Russia, for instance, for political reasons, and of course has not been so active, in our view, in other countries of the region. So would like to welcome your comments on that. Obviously, in terms of the relationship with entities like Exim Bank and EDC, and also a quick note, also what your comment about corporate social responsibility issues, for instance, and at times we call under other words corruption. So two things, if you want, the relationship with trade credit and the issue of business standards, so to speak.
Okay, so EDC, when I remember very well the first event that I actually participated in when I took over was the CERBA EDC EBRD forum in Toronto. And that was, Sarsuma came to that, he spoke at that. Minister Friedland was also there. And we signed an MOU, EBRD and EDC signed an MOU on how we will participate and cooperate together. The next couple of years, that was held firm. We had different events together. I think there were some changes at EDC because I know that the counterpart that I spoke to, she moved on. And it was not until last year that I found out who the new person was. But I think that is something that Ben and Lada should look to do sooner rather than later, to reestablish that. And then maybe they can find out why there is a less of an EDC presence. I haven't seen a lot of it myself. Their presence has been not the same as it was. I don't know, maybe there are different priorities. Maybe their priorities are much more now aligned with FinDev, and maybe they're looking more at sub-Saharan Africa with the problems there. I don't know.
See, if I may say, there was always the interest in doing a lot more in Ukraine, and we haven't seen much happening, for instance.
No, I haven't seen them there. So I think it's something that CERBA, EBRD, and EDC should work on. So over to you, Ben. You make a note now. I will send you the name, and you can take up that and run with it.
Yeah, because I think I think what we've seen is that in Central Asia there was an interest for EDC to become more active, but as you said, there were personnel changes. There was all kinds of things happen. But I think we should. This is an interesting synergy that needs to exist, if you want, between the two entities.
And there's a whole MOU about cooperating and working together that was signed around that same time that we had that conference in 2016.
Okay, good, excellent.
On the corruption, I think that's the other reason to involve yourself with an MDB of some form, because one of the things that in every project we have, our ESG. Oh, hang on, sorry. Our it had to do not disturb. I don't know how my sister got through. She must have powers. Our ESG is not just environmental and social. A big part of it is governance, and when we assess a company, that's one of the first things we look at: integrity. So we start with the top company and we work our way down to find out exactly what's going on. If we found out that one person was passed a paper bag or something like that, we wouldn't fund the company. So we take that, so we would not fund the company knowingly. I'm going to say knowingly because I'm quite sure stuff happens that we can't be everywhere. We wouldn't fund the company that was involved in that. Now, corruption at a level that's at the governmental level, that also is very, you look at the web that is woven in most of these countries. And that's why when we try to do the reforms, we try to work where things like corruption happens often when people are not paid properly. So I think the first thing we try to do is to look at how are people who make decisions paid. If they have to go off and get this brown bag, then something is wrong. So there are many different things you have to look at to deal with it, but it's a big effort from all of the MDBs to weed that out. And if a country is so corrupt, then we may not be involved at all with the government, and we definitely will not be involved with a company that is.
Michèle, I have a straightforward question. If you feel uncomfortable, don't answer. Is it possible for development institutions and financial institutions, like banks, Canadian banks, to work with businesses in the country, in Eurasia, without working with its government?
Yes.
You see?
Straight, I'll tell you, okay, 97 or 98% of what EBRD does in Turkey is with the private sector. I'm going to go as far as to say that sort of percentage is probably there in Belarus. There are other examples, but the answer is yes. Now, it also then depends on what sector, because there are some sectors that governments are inherently involved in, so you couldn't not work. So then you just go to other sectors or you go to the municipalities. So in Turkey, for instance, we work a lot with the sub-sovereign government. So the municipalities where we can probably have a relationship with a mayor who is, the due diligence of that city has passed. But there are certain sectors that you can't because the government owns it, but yes, the answer is yes. Don't ask me about that country that we don't work in at all.
Yeah.
I know Marina wants to ask me about that country we don't work in at all.
Yes, well, everybody knows about it, but you see, we're development and we are not using it as a window dressing. We are doing that. And CERBA did launch a few new initiatives, and we keep going. You see, we are working on an individual level in some countries. In some countries, we work on a business level. In some countries, only on the country level. It all depends. But yeah, we are going. I have two questions, but I will keep them until the end. And please, from the audience or Jill or somebody else.
No, that's right. I think the audience should get a crack.
Audience.
Yes.
Where are you, audience?
Nathalie, unmute yourself.
Okay, yes, this is Positron, telecommunication company from Montreal. They do work in Belarus. They have contracts in Russia. We developed Kazakhstan together, Uzbekistan. Nathalie?
Yes, hello everybody. As many of you know, the company is pursuing business opportunities in Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, to name a few. And my first question is how the EBRD's policy changed due to the recent political events in Belarus last year.
I'm going to turn, no, not really, I will turn, no.
Or
think
maybe more general question. How the bank deals with political differences?
No. So I will answer it. I was just trying to remember what happened. I know that there was no new funding of public sector projects. I know that they continue to support private sector projects where they can, and we do have a portfolio there. The office is still open there. So business goes on, but it's reviewed. So it's one of those countries that then you have to report back to the board what's going on. Has there, for instance, been any interference in the business of the companies that we're investing in? It can become tricky because we no longer would be, as the EBRD with the shareholders that we have, it would be very hard for us to have a transparent conversation with the government and say to them, stop doing X or Y. They just say, get lost, you see.
Okay.
Thank you.
Next question, please, from the audience.
Oh, look, Oliver.
Oliver has a
Yes, I rose my hand. Thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting and insightful. So my question was regarding the geopolitical risk that you mentioned in the beginning, like examples in Bulgaria and so on. So I wanted to know, how is EBRD able to minimize the risk associated with the investments?
Okay, so in most countries, let's exclude what I've just said about Belarus. In most countries, because we have because the bank would have relationships with the government. So each country, it starts like this. Each country is a shareholder of the bank. So they're actually sitting on our board. So even Belarus does, even Russia still does, because they're still a shareholder. So it starts with that relationship. We then have financings that go, not a lot, because we are much more private sector bank than a public sector bank, that goes to the government. There are offices. EBRD has offices in at least one in every single country. The head of that office and its staff, one of the main jobs that that person has is to develop a relationship with the government. So we do not guarantee that you will not fall into problems, geopolitical problems. What we can say is that were you to, we can help you out of them, because we can start a dialogue, or the bank can start a dialogue with that government to solve the problem. And there are countless examples of how this has happened and worked in the past. And if EBRD is invested or a lender to a project, a government thinks twice before interfering. So we saw that when we worked in Russia, we saw that all the time. There were companies who would, stand up in seminars and talk about it. In Ukraine, it's the same. So we have some companies in DC who would stand up and say, well, this bank, even though we were not actually the actual lender, we solved a problem for them by saying, VAT returns. That was a big thing in Ukraine. And I remember successive MDs of ours who sat in Kiev would have these discussions and demonstrate that withholding or not doing this is damaging the reputation of the country. And every country wants investment. There are very few who don't. And so that's the way you have to, if you can show that whatever that government is doing is harmful to its reputation, some don't care. And then, you have to just live with the fact that some won't care, but most do. I think we have 38 countries and most do.
Okay. May I ask a question?
There's another hand.
Okay.
A very short question. Hi, Michelle. Thank you for all the support over the years. You mentioned the MOU with EDC as of 2016, and we'll definitely be following up on that. Has there anything been done with the Canadian Commercial Corporation in terms of the agreements, interactions with the EBRD?
Not as far as I know.
Okay.
Not as far as I know, but I don't know everything. So.
Okay.
Thank you, Marina.
There was another hand.
Yes. Please, audience, question from the floor.
Okay.
Okay. While we are waiting, I may insert a few, it's about culture, Michèle. Working, you see, in US, you had a chance to work both with Canadian and American companies. Is there some different approaches they use to expand internationally or to deal with governments or with their counterparts of the over there, or it's so unique, like universal?
I don't think there is a big difference. There are some sectors that Canadian company do much better. So for instance, natural resources. When I looked back at what the relationship between the Canadian companies and the Eurasia, it was a lot of it was natural resources. So I think it's about strengths. Where I think Canadian companies can do better is agribusiness, agriculture. We're seeing a big push from the American companies into places like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan with agribusiness and grain and with agribusiness. And I think Canada has a lot to offer in that front. I think it's, when we looked at this question, Canada and the US, I think they're the major partners of each other. They don't have to go very far to do much, right? In America, the market is so huge that a very small percentage of American companies go outside of America anyway. So those are the things you have to look at. However, with competition, and I think that's why I think smaller companies, large companies can go everywhere very easily. But I think that's why I think smaller companies can do well looking outside, because I think they can do much better if they did. But you need to reach them and you need to support them. And I think that's the job for the office now that I've left it.
Wouldn't mind picking up on that theme, Michèle, because agriculture is something of interest, of course, to Western Canada. And we have a lot of technologies, and ag tech is certainly a big item. But I mean, I was involved with a working group with the Kazakhstan, Canada, and we had an ag tech working group going. Many of the companies, at least in Alberta, tend to be very small. Very small, on the small to middle size, they're small. Some of them are sort of family operations,
right? But
they've got some fantastic technologies and wherewithal knowledge. I'm just wondering how we could approach these smaller companies to become interested. I mean, and they are working in Kazakhstan. They get a lot of government funding, which is how they get. Yeah, but at the moment, government funding is drying up, certainly in Alberta, because it's just facing challenges. So how could a small company in Canada, in Alberta, how should they approach this?
Well, I think they're doing the right thing. So you get, at least they're there. So step one is be there. Step two is the funding that is being done around agriculture and agribusiness in Kazakhstan right now is part of their big diversification. So the government will start having, it's sort of like it's a little train. So you drive in and then the people at the front do a little bit of work. That thing grows. So the sector will grow and there will be more opportunities. It's about waiting. The big deal is they are there. Now, the step two for them, if I were them, is as you are there, make friends and partners, because you're not going to be able to be there all the time unless you've set up a little office. So a partnership would be the way to go. Second thing I would say to them is go into we have offices there. Just go in for a chat. We have lovely people everywhere. Go in for a chat, try to understand a little bit, and they'll give free information, because we've got bankers who will just sit down and have a chat. Understand what the sector is doing, where the sector is going, And they can also possibly say, well, you know, why don't you speak to X Kazakh company who might be as small as you, but you and it together might be not so small after all. That would be my advice.
Okay.
But the positive thing is that you're there. You know, there are not many people who are there.
No. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
And there is an MOU between EBRD, we love MOUs, I don't know if you've noticed. There's an MOU between the EBRD's agribusiness sector team and the government of Alberta.
Is it really?
And it's all but it's all about Ukraine. To push Canadian tech into Ukraine.
Wow, good to know. Wow,
How
I think
about
we
construction? Is there anything on the construction and infrastructure development between any of the provinces or Canada and EBRD and Ukraine?
I'm going to say no. There was you know, that's a very interesting sector. So if you looked at construction or infrastructure, or my favorite, real estate, which has both construction and infrastructure in it. In the early days, we saw a lot of Canadian developers. And again, that thing has drifted off. That is another area to explore.
Mm-hmm. Well, the project currently ongoing is concerning the agricultural sector. It's building the bridges in the rural area to make it easier for the farmers to transport produce. And EDC is not part of that. CCC is part of that. So I was wondering whether this sector could be further developed with the help of EBRD.
I would say yes.
Okay.
So what I would suggest, Mr. Todd, is that you try to get the CCC connections and find out from our colleagues in HQ whether or not there is already a relationship. I'm quite sure there is. I just don't know anything about it.
Okay.
Very good. I think we should finalize it. I welcome you to ask questions in the chat or write them to me or to G, to any of CERBA regional directors. Michèle, to underline again and to learn again, last chance to learn a bit from you, from your personal again developments. By now, what do you understand that others are still figuring it out in any field you want? Is there a message that you would like to deliver or to say for us to focus on it and to understand that this is very much important, how we could set priorities?
So I think for CERBA, the priority should be, I think focus well on all the MDBs. So think which sectors, which of your members, which sectors your members want to pursue. And then set up small, and it could be like this. It doesn't have to be a huge 50 people webinar. It could be just, and I think this works much better because people can, ask direct questions and go to the sort of the people who are actually doing this stuff. So if it's agribusiness, go to our agri sector team. If it is clean tech, but that's what I would do. I would hold a series of small introductory webinars. We have done a lot with CERBA that have been more general, and I think that's good for introducing who we are. But I think it's time that it becomes much more intimate, much more, one-on-one. That would be my advice.
Okay, thank you very much. And for your future, I hope we part like that.
I'll end on that. I'm available.
Yes.
To help anyone, to talk to anyone about anything. I will stay in the development world, the development finance world. My skills are helping companies understand the countries that we're in, understand how to do due diligence, and I'll be around. So we will stay in touch. You're not getting rid of me that easily. I'll be around. I'll keep popping up at these sessions.
Oh, very good, Michèle. This is what we are looking forward to so much. And we will appreciate your guidance, setting up meetings, maybe just to subordinate them, not to overwhelm you. And
yeah, don't worry. You've got Ben, but please, you can always reach out to me. I will, you know, and I'm here. If a company has a question that is not just particular to EBRD, but it is particular, then please give them my email, give them my number. I'm happy to talk to them.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's my future anyway.
Okay. Is it a good idea, Gilles, to invite Ben and Lada maybe to say a few words also at the end, because they are.
As you liked it, but they will not get away. We'll get back to them and try to invite them to our CERBA event now.
Exactly. Don't let him steal my thunder.
No. You can certainly say a few words now, but you will be hearing from us.
Yes, if we can, I'll write you, and if you have something to say, please. Benjamin,
it's always great to hear from Michèle. I've learned so much from her, and you know, it's a loss to be quite frank in this office, not having her around for her advice or experience and everything that she was able to offer. So while it's unfortunate that she's not with us in the office officially anymore, it's always good to see her, and I'm happy to continue talking about these topics. I put my email address in the chat so we can follow up. And while this is a CERBA event, I see Elena here too, and of course, Elena, happy to talk about how we can work together as well with your association.
Wonderful. Yeah.
It will be of a lot of help to you, we swear, Benjamin.
Okay.
And the other point actually is that I think once this was done, but when there was a joint event, or Elena invited CERBA to something, I think that works well, because you reach, you know, so that thing that there was one joint event. Elena, yep. I don't know if you want to say a few words, but I think that itself is a good idea.
Yes.
Don't pocket it into one thing.
Yes, on our behalf, we are always open, and we did organize together some events with Elena. The only thing, our suggestion is just to not minimize Canadian interest, to put somehow together for Canadian and American companies. That's all we ask.
No, but sometimes when it is focused on one country,
okay.
Like for instance, if it's an Uzbek thing, then it would be good to bring Canadian companies. That's what I'm saying. That's when, so not on a sector, but possibly on a country. So if there's an Uzbek or a Kyrgyz or a Kazakh, something like that, that's my advice.
But
because then
even
the Canadians can put their hand up when it comes to agriculture and things like that.
Yes. Elena, we invite you to speak with us also, you see, before you have good ideas, and we too will be writing to inviting to collaborate. What do you think?
I think that we have established very good collaboration during the COVID time, and I think that we've done wonderful partnerships in this past year, and collaborated on EBRD and other IFIs. And we certainly look forward to supporting the interests in Central Asia. I think the more the merrier. And also, if we have companies that would like to explore, we welcome competition. It actually benefits the US, it benefits the private sector, and it benefits the Central Asia. So the more competition there is between Americans and Canadians, so be it. I think that every one of us will win from that. But yeah, we're absolutely appreciative of what Michèle has done for our companies. And I think that yesterday we had a conversation that the success of any business enterprise depends on the individuals that are involved. We wouldn't be here today if it were not for Michèle. It's the energy, it's the optimism, it's the tireless effort and the hard work. And I think that we need more people like that working on Central Asia and on other countries of the former Soviet Union. They shouldn't be neglected. They should have the expertise that Ben, Michèle, and all of you possess. But we also need someone who is committed and someone who is not going to give up on that region.
Yes.
I'm not.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
And yes, when we speak about projects like that, they're huge. We should, I think, find the ways to see us more as partners and to partner companies, not to see them as competitors, because there are certain ways you see to partner them, to matchmake them. And we just need more meetings together. And you imagine two governments get together in one country, it's just a big plus. Thank you. And colleagues or participants, please, your gratitude to Michèle, who wants to speak. Good moment. Good moment to do that. If anybody else, please feel free.
Okay, I think we're good. Thank you very much.
No, thank you all actually for having me, and it was great. Thank you.
We will record the meeting and we'll be listening, reviewing it more and more, Michèle, because there is tons of information for us, a year or 2 years to work on, and we will distribute it among all the companies that couldn't join us today. So
okay, thank you.
Very much appreciate
Thank you very much. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks.
Looking forward. Good luck.
Thank you.
Good luck. Thank you.